Is the vaccine, the pace of the rollout, the success of the rollout, really one of the key things that you're worried about as an economist?
Absolutely. I think that is something that everyone's looking out for. It's one of the main headwinds for growth in 2021, and it is likely that it will take longer than expected to implement those rollout programs, especially in emerging markets where you have structural complications surrounding the size of the population, many of which are undocumented. India is a great example with the vaccine program being very ambitious, but we still have to wait and see how quick they'll be able to implement that. So that is one of the reasons why we are seeing this recovery narrative not interrupted, but delayed into 2022, with there being significant headwinds still for Q1 this year.
So do the top performers economically still remain the ones that we've seen so far, which are countries that have managed the virus very well, and the next step is to be able to get their population to a high level of vaccination?
Mm-hmm. That is correct. So remember that the vaccination does not have an impact on this current wave of the COVID-19. But if these countries are able to implement their programs quick enough, it might prevent there being a third wave in the spring of 2021 or going forwards. So of course, countries that are able to roll out these programs quicker will experience more tailwind going forwards. We have examples like the US and the UK or Israel. They've definitely been leading in terms of doses per 100 people. In Asia, of course, in China, they've been implementing vaccines since August last year. So unclear how effective that vaccine is compared to some of its competitors. But it is definitely something that will enable China to continue to lead on the growth front, despite there being an increase in cases there as well, with Beijing and Shanghai now on partial lockdown. We do continue to expect to see those markets lead, and there are other regions in Asia Pacific, that would be Southeast Asia and India, where just due to the structural composition of the economies there and their geographies, it might take a little bit longer before we are able to see the rebound materialize in those markets.
Hong Kong has already emerged from its first lockdown there. What hope is there for the economy? We are expecting GDP numbers out of the city this week at a time when they've been hit hard, not only by the pandemic, but also by this protests that we saw in the last couple of years.
Mm-hmm. That's right. So in Hong Kong, we do expect a second consecutive year of negative declines. Q4 GDP was likely also more negative than expected as a result of there being an increase in cases that would mark the sixth quarter of consecutive contraction in Hong Kong. Last year, we had this triple whammy of protests, COVID-19, but also the negative impact of the US-China trade war on all of the export front. Luckily, as a result of increased demand for some types of Chinese manufactured goods, many of which go via Hong Kong, on the export front, there's been a bit of a tailwind. So that is definitely going to work in Hong Kong's favor. But we do not expect domestic consumption to resume to the levels seen 2 years ago. So that is going to continue to weigh on activity. The good news for Hong Kong is that there is a significant favorable base effect, with GDP expected to be -7% in 2020. So heading into 2021, hopefully back into positive territory.
That's a hope, right? -7% going into positive. Is it a similar situation when it comes to South Korea, especially when it comes to muted domestic demand as opposed to external tailwinds coming from those exports? We are expecting their growth numbers as well this week, and the expectation is not that optimistic.
In South Korea, remember, it's a little bit better now, but during Q4, we did see a pickup in cases, and they had to reintroduce some degree of social distancing. So you're right, we are expecting that growth number to be a little bit more disappointing than expected, potentially in Q4, maybe in the range of -1.5%. But we are expecting a rebound in that market as well. That base effect won't be as big as in other places, so we do not expect it to be more than 2.5 to 3% for South Korea. But it's definitely something that will favor GDP. That base effect will definitely help GDP. Exports will continue to lead that recovery. With this delay in the normalization process. South Korean exports will continue to benefit, so that tailwind won't disappear outright in 2021. The domestic demand narrative is going to be a little bit more complicated. Bank of Korea has signaled that they're not keen to implement additional monetary easing, so it will be a matter of just being patient and allowing for that vaccine program and allowing for that gradual normalization to kick in and to boost domestic sentiment and to hopefully have consumers return to normal consumption patterns, but no time before end of the year of 2022.
I'm glad you mentioned consumers. We also have industrial production numbers out from China, but I'm more curious about the consumer side of that recovery story. Is there a concern that a lack of travel, some of the local outbreaks that we've seen in China is going to mean that we'll see some muted numbers coming out of this Chinese New Year season?
Mm-hmm. Well, there's two things. First of all is the retail sales numbers released last week were a little bit disappointing. I would remain still on the cautious side because we do expect that recovery will be domestic consumption led in 2021 in China, and that slightly weaker December number could also be reflective of a base effect as well as colder weather, preventing households from going out and consuming. So there's been a cold weather spat, so that might have played a role. The Chinese New Year is of course the main commercial season, and they haven't outright banned travel. But they are discouraging it quite strongly. So we will not see a big rebound in the same way that we saw a big pickup in domestic consumption during the Chinese New Year season as a result of this sort of qualitative approach to preventing households from traveling. No outright ban, remember, but of course they are going to make it very tricky for people to move around. But heading into Q2 and Q3, we should see that domestic recovery narrative really kick in the Chinese economy, favoring that much higher growth number for 2021.